Hello, it's Lance McCarthy here with Dave Oswald. I'd just like to give a shout out to my sponsor, Chim's Cabins. Chim's Cabins in Port Alberni, BC offers six private cabins sleeping one to five guests in one to three beds, all featuring full-size kitchens and dedicated guest laundry. Stay here, travel there. Your last stop before the West Coast, just a short drive to Tofino. Book direct at chims.ca, chims.ca for the best rates, and they'll be tagged in this video. So I'll give it to you, Dave.
How you doing, Franz? Hans,
Good.
sorry.
Doing good. Let you introduce yourself.
Okay, so I'm Dave Oswald. I'm a forensics accountant. I'm a certified fraud examiner. I'm a certified forensics investigator of Canada. I'm a chartered accountant in both South Africa and Canada. And I've been in the forensics game since uh, my first fraud I found was in 1987 or 86. So a long, long time ago. I've been in this game for.
Okay, so I just wanted to talk to you on this podcast about Frog Lake First Nations. I know that we've seen you on APTN making comments on Frog Lake First Nations, and you basically looked at the consolidated financial audits of Frog Lake. I was wondering, what did you find from those public records?
Well, let's back up a little bit. We were first approached by one of the members, one of the granddaughter of one of the hereditary chiefs of Frog Lake, with concerns about her band, about Frog Lake. And she said that a lot of money had gone missing from the band, and she wanted some answers as to where it had gone to. So we decided to humor her and have a look at the last 5 years of bank statements or 7 years, not bank statements, sorry, financial statements that have been issued, public record, and we started putting some numbers together. And what we found was basically shocking. Um, Frog Lake, for those of you who don't know, is situated on an oil patch. It's a band which has been run. It's a band which should be very, very wealthy. It's on a very good oil patch, and it's constantly got really good handouts from the government. And yet, when we were up there, people are still living in poverty. There's people's houses are falling apart, and it's really not very good.
Yeah, it's I would say as being a band member myself, it's still much of the same thing. I know that we are sitting on a lot of oil and there's a lot of recoverable barrels of oil as well too. I looked a bit into that, and it sits on basically the same kind of tar sand oil and as the Athabasca tar sands up north as well too. But they kind of call Frog Lake an area like mini Fort McMurray, how much oil there is, and we had I think oil was first discovered in 1970 something, and then came about Flirk. Joe Dion and Raymond Quinney were the one that established that and brought about Flirk, and it brought in a lot of royalties because before that, the government didn't really allow us to profit from our own oil or anything like that until we basically formed our own corporation. But yeah, there's been a lot of royalties coming from there. But like you said, there's still a lot of poverty in our community.
Yeah, I mean, when Flick first started off, it did provide a lot of money to the First Nation. Let's be honest about it. At the time when, and back in 2013, 2014, there was around about 120, $130 million that was sitting in trust funds that were held. So the band had certainly built up a substantial amount of money. I mean, when you're talking about a band of 1,500 people, 120, 130 million is almost $100,000 per person.
Yeah.
That's man, woman, and child. So it's a substantial reserve. It's not a small amount of money. Unfortunately, by the time, so, Flirk was part of why that growth in the trust fund occurred. But in latter years, Flirk stopped making money, and at one point in time, we were actually subsidizing Flirk, which is very strange because the oil industry had dropped. There's no doubt about it. We dropped from $120 a barrel down to about 45, $50 a barrel or something like that. So yes, there was a big movement in the oil price down, but the infrastructure and everything else was in place at Frog Lake for producing the oil. So it wasn't as if we were spending major amounts of capital in order to bring oil to the surface. And so a drop like that in profitability, yes, would have affected the amount of money that was earned, but certainly shouldn't have become a loss.
Yeah, so I know the main headlines were $120 million in net financial assets lost. That was on the APTN thing there, and it's the when I partnered up with the Canadian Taxpayer Federation as well too. We looked at that, and then we looked at the trust account went from 102 million down to about approximately 8 million, or even lower than that. I'm not quite sure. Those numbers are from the top of my head within I think a 6 year span. Um,
Yeah.
the thing is too is that I don't really want to speculate on what happened, but from your expertise, can you make an educated guess or an assumption on what did happen to that money?
Well, I mean, to give you the actual numbers that we had, because I don't want to be misquoted on this,
Yeah.
um, we had 102 million in trust fund in 2013.
Mm,
And basically by 2015, that had dropped to 96 million. So 4 million had gone from the trust fund in 2 years. Long-term investments had gone from 50 million to 33 million during that same time period. So we'd lost 20 odd million in 2 years. Now,
mm.
again, I mean, keep in context that this is a band with 1,500 people. So to lose $20 million, you're losing $30,000 per person over a 2 year period. It's a lot of money. Then things started to go horribly wrong at Frog Lake. So the trust fund dropped from 96 million in 2015. By the way, the figures that I'm quoting from are directly from the published financial statements. I haven't, despite my best efforts, been able to get to the actual books of Frog Lake. We've only been able to analyze what is on public record.
Yeah.
So in 2016, the value dropped to 70 million or $26 million loss in trust funds in 1 year. And the long-term investments dropped by 8 million in the same period. So we lost 34 million in 1 year. The next year was also a disaster. We lost 26 million from the trust funds, but we actually gained 6 million in long-term investments. The following year, we lost $40 million in trust funds, dropping our trust funds down to 4.5 million. And in 2018, our long-term investments were 27 million. Now, it's important to note that in 2019, things kind of stabilized, and in 2020, they stabilized again. But one needs to really have a look at what happened to the revenue during that period of time.
Yeah.
And basically, what happened is the government handouts became larger and larger during that period. So, if it hadn't been for the government increasing the amount of money that was being supplied to the band, things would have gone even further south. The government went from putting 27 million, well, government and First Nations resources went from 27 million in 2019 to 43 million in 2020. So that was an increase of $16 million. If it hadn't been for that 16 million, the band would have been bankrupt.
Yeah.
So quite scary that you can have that type of figure going through. As I say, if it hadn't been for the government standing up and almost doubling the amount of money that was being allocated to the band would now be in an insolvent position. In 2021, which was the last year I've done figures on, the amount of money from the government was up to 45 million.
Yeah.
So you take 45 million over 1,500 people, that's a lot of money per person that the government is actually putting in. And this is a nation that really should be self-sufficient.
Yeah, yeah, it's the this basically like with the $120 million of net financial assets lost, it makes me question what's happening right now currently with Frog Lake First Nation. So we got a cows and plow settlement. We got 187 million or 189 million from the government from cows and plows. They didn't distribute that all to the people. They were trying to only give 25,000 per capita, but the people fought for 35,000 per capita, but it should have been approximately around 50,000 per capita, 48,000. But from there, they kept 50 million for themselves, and they're saying that's in a trust. And some people are saying they can't touch a trust, but you look at what's going on right now. If they can't touch the trust, who can? You look at the previous thing from what happened to our trust right now. They're the only ones that have the access to that. Another thing as well too, because of the water settlement, the delayed water settlement, we got another 70 some million dollars. We got money for infrastructure. So we got a water plant that's coming up as well too. And then we got an equine therapy facility that's cost $36 million. So the government is really giving out a lot more money right now, and there's money's coming up from settlements. But the thing is that these guys are not being transparent about the monies that they currently have and what's going on with that. And then the Hayland settlements coming up right now. There's supposed to be a $300 million settlement between Frog Lake, Onion Lake, Kehewan, and Cold Lake. So that's just a crap ton of money coming in, and still we have issues of poverty with all that.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the most concerning part is that you had 150 odd million, 150 million in 2013 in investments, and that had dropped to 30 million by 2020. So over a really short period of time, the amount of investments made had dropped substantially. Now, one can ask, well, where did this money get spent? And the frightening part of it is that we spent a huge amount of money on housing. We spent 50 million on the income statement in housing, and we spent another 50 odd million on in fixed assets on housing, capital assets on housing. So in total, we've spent over $100 million in housing. Now, if I take it that a house is built at around about 350, $400 per square foot, and we're talking today, we're not talking 2013, 2014, that would equal, a huge amount of square feet that was available in order to fund this. Now, yes, some of the money that was in the housing goes to the housing department, but it's not that big of a housing department that it's going to chew up millions and millions of dollars. Um, and so at the end of the day, when you start doing the figures, everybody in Frog Lake should really be living in a mansion. They should be making the Vancouver homes look really cheap. But when we were up there and having a look at the houses in Frog Lake, there wasn't running water to houses, there wasn't sewage to houses. A lot of the houses were porta cabins, which were falling apart. And then there's a long wait list for people to get housing.
Yep.
So that, to me, is quite frightening that that type of thing happens. Now, the other thing which was really interesting is we had a look at the salaries of everybody during that period. And we noticed that, Greg Degelet, who's chief, his salary went from 65,000 per annum in 2014 to 85,000 per annum in 2018. But the frightening part is that he had $71,000 in travel and expenses, and he got a further 50,000 or 40,000, sorry, from Frog Lake Energy Resources. So in total, Greg's salary had gone up from 158 to 201 million. Now, we actually raised all of these points with Greg and with the rest of the nation when we were up there. We were invited by the elders to speak. And we spoke at a meeting, and during that meeting, Greg actually said that he was going to institute a forensics audit in front of the band members. And at a second meeting that we had, Greg couldn't make it for some unknown reason. But two of the councillors were there, actually signed our engagement letter in front of the elders, saying that, yes, this was going ahead, only for them to tear it up the next day and say that there was no way they were going to have a forensics audit. And the same happened with Greg. Now, you would think that they would, having been called out on the salaries and the travel and entertainment expenses, you'd have thought that the band would have, or the chief and council would have been ultra transparent and reined in their expenditure. They've been exactly the opposite. No figures for chief and council have been released on the FNTFA website since 2018, when we actually approached them and pointed out how much money they were earning. Now, these are figures that are required by government in order to be posted. And they should be figures that are required by the band members to be posted. Because let's face it, these are people who work for you, the band members. They're not, you don't work for chief and council. Chief and council actually work for you. And you're entitled to know how much money you're paying them in order to have them run their council.
Yeah, it's pretty much about it. Hit the nail right on the head. I can't really say it any better than that. So, yeah, that's pretty much it about Frog Lake First Nations and what's going on with it.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a look, the band government right through all of this period has been running at around about $2.8 million, between 2.8 and $3 million. When the crisis hit in 2020, when the band was out of funds, suddenly they managed to drop to 2 million. So they dropped off almost $1 million out of their band, out of the band government. But there's some frightening things. Education is sitting over the 8-year period at 69 million. Now, we did a calculation and we worked it backwards and we said, okay, well, we've spent 69 million on education. And we said, okay, well, what does a private school cost in the Edmonton area? Because Frog Lake's fairly close to Edmonton. And it worked out that we could almost have sent every single child to a private school, and it would have been cheaper than running our education department. This is an education department that is not producing the quality of child or the quality of education that it should be producing in order to have people who are going in and making things work. When we were up there, there were 4 baseball fields. I don't know what the state of those baseball fields are now, but at the stage we were up there, 1 baseball field was left in operation. 3 baseball fields were completely destroyed. The dugouts were cheap and had fallen apart within a couple of years, and millions of dollars had been spent on these 4 baseball fields. The rodeo rink is another one where A lot of money was spent. And when I looked at it, I could not see the justification for the amount of money that had been spent. Now, I might be wrong. There might be figures that I didn't understand. The stands might have cost a lot more than what I my guesstimate would have been for them. But this is why we were asking to be able to see, or asking them to have a forensics audit to say to the nation, yes, everything that was held or everything that was done was above board. And, this is why we've spent $10 million or whatever the number was on 4 baseball fields. Once we've got that and once we've seen those numbers and we've seen the contracts and we've seen how it was put together, then we can make a realistic decision on whether there was value for money there
Yeah.
or whether there isn't. And I mean, this is the big thing about big difference between a financial audit and a forensics audit is a financial audit looks at the value on the balance sheet at the end of each year and says, is that about right? It doesn't have a look to see how the money was spent and whether there was value for money. If there's a receipt for something and they're able to put a green tick beside that, then as far as the auditors are concerned, that's fine. They've done their job. Their job is not to look for fraud. Our job, on the other hand, is to go and have a look at those contracts and work out, was there value for money or was there a horrible overspend? And my gut feel is that in some of these areas, there was a breakdown in the amount that was spent, and there's been a large amount of money that has been lost by the band.
Yeah.
As I say, if it hadn't been for the government standing in and increasing the amount of money significantly, I'll just give you some figures quickly on Frog Lake Resources, which we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
In 2013 and 14, they provided 7 million to the band, but from 2015 onwards, we funded, or Frog Lake funded them 550,000, 5 million, 4 million, 3 million, and 4 million. These are major numbers. That's 20 million almost that was funded. Sorry, 15 million that was funded to the Energy Resources Company between 2015 and 2019. And I struggle to see why we would have lost that amount of money, even though the oil prices were significantly lower during that time period.
Yeah. No. Um, yeah, it's crazy that even from looking at what happened to Frog Lake, and the sad thing is that I just had a guy on from northern Quebec. He said they went from 144 million down to 13 million in a trust account. And it's quite a common story across Canada for First Nation communities. And that's why so many people seem to relate to the story and what has happened. And another thing as well, too, I know the FSIN, we're going to be talking about that next episode with you as well. They talk about the FSN, it's a national headline, but you look at all these bands that are losing money, single bands quite more, and FSIN represents 74 different bands.
Mm. Well, if you have a look at it, I mean, one of the problems, and as you said, we will be talking about FSIN on Thursday, so we don't want to preempt it too much, or Friday,
Mhm.
we don't want to preempt it too much. But one of the things that we've got to be worried about as members of Frog Lake is that if the government decides to do an audit and they then work out that money has been spent, not in terms of what the programs were, or money has not been, there's no justification for the spend, then the government may well start reclaiming some of this money as they have done with FSIN.
Yeah,
And that would bankrupt Frog Lake.
yeah.
And one of the things, and I've just finished an audit in another band, or we were stopped halfway through the audit of another band. But one of the interesting parts was they got a whole bunch of COVID funds. And the way the COVID funds were divvied out was really, really interesting. The chief would get $10,000, and the band manager would get eight, and the other councillors would all get eight. And it was justified by the work they were doing for the community. But there were no timesheets. There were no, this is what we actually did. It was just a handout to them. And they lost a significant amount of money through that process. Now, that to me is problematic. We had a look at one of the investments at this other band, and we had the opportunity to actually have a look at the investment. And one of the things we noticed is that the chief at the time, not the current chief, but the chief at the time the purchase had been made, had got a commission from the company, a significant commission from the company. And that makes you think, well, was that a commission or was that a bribe? And I tend to fall into the latter category.
Mhm.
We were stopped by the band economic manager from looking back at the last 5 years of financial statements for the company. He said that no, we were just wasting money, and he managed to convince the chief at the time to only let us look at the financial documents from the time that we had actually bought the company. Um, there was a lot wrong in that period of time. In fact, there were major losses that hadn't been accounted for. There's a lot of shady deals that were there. And it made me wonder why the band manager or the economic development manager had stopped us from going any further back. And my gut feel is that he had been paid a substantial bonus for buying this company.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that whole mess turned into a $10 million loss for that band. So, Frog Lake's not on its own in these type of dealings. The other problem is when you have a look at a First Nation like Frog Lake, there's maybe one, maybe two, if you're really lucky, there's 10 people who have got financial degrees, who are chartered accountants, or who have actual knowledge of financial accounting. Um, the rest of the people, through no fault of their own, have no clue how to read a balance sheet and income statement. And one of the things which bugs me in particular about most of the bands that I've talked to in Canada is that none of these bands hire an independent person, somebody like me or maybe one of the auditing companies, to actually go and explain in detail what is happening with the financials to the band members 2, 3, 4 times a year. We have a band meeting once a year. You don't get you don't find companies who only report yearly on their financials to their members. If you're a shareholder of a large corporation, you're getting, even on the stock exchange, you're getting at least quarterly financial statements
Yeah.
that have taken place. As far as the band goes, these should be monthly that are coming out. And there should be somebody there to actually explain to the members that this is how you read these financial statements, and this is where this is why things have gone up, where they're going, and allow people then to question whether the expenditure is actually justified or not. By the
Yeah.
time a year's gone by, it's too late. There's too much for people to look at, and sensory overload, to be honest with you.
Okay, well, we have time's pretty much up right about now. I do agree with you when you talk about having the community members have a fundamental knowledge of finances. I think that would for sure set a lot of things straight. Even basic bookkeeping or a basic accounting class or bookkeeping class to understand cash flow or balance sheets or the accounting formula or something like that, debit and credit to basically help people out. And that's a big lack of knowledge on First Nation communities, as you pinpointed it as well too. Like when you said all of these guys could have went to private school, but then you have people on reserve. I'm just going to admit it myself. My kids, they don't go to on reserve schools for that fact because of the lower education level. My kids go to county school where there's a lot of white kids, but the education is a lot better and they have a lot of extracurricular activities and a lot more things. And with $69 million, Frog Lake, they should have been spending on the kids and educating them more properly so they could understand some of these things and we could have more educated people. But we could keep going on this topic, but I'd just like to end it there. I'd like to thank Dave Oswald for coming on here and sharing his information. I really appreciate your time, especially for someone with your profession and your expertise. And Dave Oswald will be on for the next episode, which will be aired on Friday about the FSIN as well too. Any last words?
No, I just think it really is, to me, it's very sad that the First Nations are going through what they're going through at the moment. It it is not fair for the people in the First Nations who are suffering because of a few people. And at the end of the day, there's no reason why there should be.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much, Dave.
Thanks, Hans. Have a good evening.
Have a good evening.